Chapter 25. Every free moment, I continue to learn everything I could about cancer, Michelle's type of cancer in particular. And I read journal articles by the hundreds. Now, my main focus was on immunotherapy and natural treatments. Not necessarily to replace the chemo, although I don't like chemo, but to at least supplement it, right? The toughest battles are won and lost by the slimmest of margins. I just wanted to make sure we were doing everything possible to win this fight. And then some. But Michelle's cancer was a tricky type. And a lot of the treatments that work on other cancers wouldn't work on hers, including most of the natural medicines like resveratrol and turmeric and most of those things. And they wouldn't work because their cancer suppressing qualities, right, come from their ability to boost a powerful cancer suppressing gene called PTEN, right? And Michelle's cancer had already lost that gene, so it couldn't be boosted. And think about what PTEN is and how it works. I give the reference that it's kind of like the spring underneath your car's gas pedal, right? So without it, imagine the pedal, it's just going to tend to fall to the floor, right? And the car's just going to, the cell's just going to replicate as fast as it can. That's what it's like. It's like the spring. It's literally almost like a spring in a way. I mean, it moves a PIP2, PIP3 reaction back and forth. But that's what it's like. It's like a spring underneath your car's gas pedal. And without it, the cell just replicates as fast as it can because that gas pedal just falls to the floor. Stays on the floor, right, with no spring there. But with a whole lot of research, I did find some non-PTEN dependent natural remedies, natural medicines, and with her doctor's blessings, Michelle began taking them. It took a long time to find those, and there are some powerful natural cancer fighting medicines. I think a big part is probably catching cancer, or probably preventing it, and catching it early. Probably there. Once it gets to a certain point, cancer is very, very, very difficult to treat. On the immunotherapy front, there are a lot of very exciting developments with the checkpoint inhibitors. And just a few months ago, at the time, a group at Stanford had published a paper where they cured metastatic cancer in mice just by injecting a single tumor, right, with a tiny amount of two different chemicals simultaneously. And I really felt like we were on the verge of a real breakthrough. And I still do. I still feel like we are. And I excitedly relayed the news to Michelle. But when I started trying to explain the scientific details of what made this particular treatment so promising, Michelle's eyes just glazed over. So I set out to replicate the experiment at home. So instead of just hearing me talk about it, she could see it with her own eyes, right? Because seeing is believing, right? So I did some research on it, and I found out that the equipment needed for a very simplified version of the experiment. I tell you right now, I didn't do the thing like Stanford did it at all, right? This is a very simplified version, but a version of it nonetheless. So the equipment that was needed for a simplified version of the experiment was all readily available and affordable. And the reagents weren't hazardous, and they didn't require any special licensing to purchase or work with. So I did my research, because that's part of my job, compliance, right? Just make sure I wasn't breaking any laws or anything like that. And after pricing it all out, I realized I could actually do it, or at least a small version of it, right? At home, legally, and with minimal difficulty. So for just under about $5,000, which that's a fair amount of money, but that's cheap in lab terms, right? So you got to keep it in perspective, right? And also think like, what good is money? you know, if your family ain't there to spend it with and enjoy it with, you ain't gonna care about that $5,000 anyhow. It's one of the best investments I ever made in my life. Anyhow, that's neither here nor there. But for just under about $5,000, I was able to set up a small lab in one of our spare bedrooms, and it was complete with centrifuge and vortexer and pipettes and syringes, mouse cages, and just all the other equipment you need for a simplified version of the Stanford experiment, right? And you know, a lot of stuff is like knockoffs, right? Like the pipettes and pipettes are crazy expensive, but you can get like cheap Chinese knockoffs that are, I mean, good enough for what I was doing. You know, we're talking about microliter amounts here too. And they're pretty good. I mean, they're knockoffs. You wouldn't want it in your $1 million lab, but in your home lab, $5,000 doing a version of an experiment for your wife, you know, to see it and be motivated by it. They did just fine. So, in keeping with the theme of simplification, I called around the pet shops to find mice that already had tumors instead of trying to induce them myself with carcinogenic chemicals or trying to buy some expensive mouse strain that was bred to be susceptible to cancer. And I was never able to find any mice that had multiple tumors, right? But I found several that had single tumors, right? Single lesions. And just to be clear, this was never done for publication. It was never intended to meet any rigorous scientific standard for scrutiny by peer review. The Stanford lab had already done all that, okay? And this was just a simple demonstration I set out to do to give Michelle hope after receiving such a devastating diagnosis. So I included controls, but that's about it, you know. I never autopsied the mice afterwards or examined any tissues. We gave them names and kept them as pets afterwards, right? Baker Lab wasn't in the mouse killing business. I was just repeating what other people had already done successfully, so Michelle could see it and be motivated by it. So Michelle and a few friends and family were there when I injected a visible tumor about the size of a marble on our first cancer mouse. And the experiment called for injections every other day for a total of 3 injections over 5 days. And sure enough, the tumor was almost undetectable in like a week with that first mouse. I'm pretty sure Michelle didn't think it would work. And I'll be honest with you, I was a bit surprised myself. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I'm no expert on mouse physiology, right? And an abscess looks a lot like a tumor, okay? But we repeated the experiment on several other mice and had similar results. So whatever those lumps were, they were disappearing. And Michelle and I were duly impressed. Hope. That candle in the darkness that had recently begun to sputter and wane, now flamed anew, bright, brilliant with promise. After all the bad news we'd had, an actual cure for cancer in people might not be too far off in the future. We just had to hold on long enough until it was ready. Stay healthy and just hold on, baby. It's coming. Just hold on.